Hi, everybody. It's your boy, and we are back after a brief hiatus to talk about the Bonded Vault Heist. This video is the first of what I hope to be a series of videos in which I bring you a little slice of the chaotic history of America's smallest state, Rhode Island. So here we are, the Bonded Vault Heist. It's a very cinematic story. It has action, mystery, romance, betrayal, pretty much anything you would want in an exciting story. A little bit of background, Providence has a pretty nasty reputation, somewhat earned. However, I think most of its bad rap is unwarranted. It's not like the place is run by criminals anymore. What I'm trying to say is that we had a bit of a mafia problem. Really, one of the cool things about talking about the mafia is we get into a little bit of Italian history, some early Italian American history when we're talking about the early 1900s, the stuff that was going on in Italy. I think that's a fun little background that explains mafia culture in general. I also believe it has a lot of parallels to modern immigration issues, which I think everybody can learn a little bit more about. I can only go into so much detail, but let's just say the early 1900s were not very good for southern Italy. Disease, poverty, and whatnot. And Rhode Island was a pretty good destination for people looking to rehome themselves. We were still a manufacturing hub at the time, evidenced today by the abundant apartment complexes made out of old abandoned textile mills. And it's pretty cool. Fruit of the Loom, you ever hear of that? That was us. That was us, baby. And where have you heard this story before? With manufacturing comes a need for cheap labor. So immigrants come in to sort of fill that need to provide cheap products. It's very similar to issues with modern immigration. People are always concerned, like they're going to come in and they'll take our jobs. And that was sort of the concern at the time. In 1908, across the Massachusetts border in Worcester, our hero, and I use that term loosely, put that in big quotes, Raymond Loretta Salvatore Patriarca was born to immigrant parents. The family moved to Providence when Raymond was only 4, where Mr. Patriarca ran a liquor business in the predominantly Italian neighborhood of Federal Hill, which is still a hub of Italian culture in Providence to this day. Skip forward a little bit. Mr. Patriarca died when Raymond was only 16, which appears to be a very devastating experience for him. I have no real way of knowing exactly how he responded emotionally to it, but this is really when Raymond kind of went off the rails. Later on in life, when asked about his youthful indiscretions, the crime of his youth, Raymond responds, why do a lot of young men do a lot of things when they don't have a father? And while Raymond is totally full of shit all the time, and at the time he is making that quote, he's denying that he's doing any crime currently. That's just in the past. But to a certain degree, I kind of believe part of it. Like a lot of the craziest, evilest people had complicated home lives. And losing a father, I'm not saying there's any easy age to lose a father, but losing a father at 16, there's a lot of opportunity for bad choices that come with that age. From there, it may be easier to describe what crimes Raymond didn't commit. Just going to give a brief synopsis of some of the early stuff. It was mostly rum running early on during Prohibition, and then afterwards, he got into gambling and prostitution. He was not the prostitute. He was a pimp. He was a pimp. So Raymond continued to build his criminal resume faster than most do, and he got a lot of attention from the five families of New York. They were a big deal in the criminal underworld. This gave Raymond some of the most vital friends one could have in his line of work. He also got close to a guy named Philip Bucala. Bucala was in charge of a significant Boston organization, and he was going to be Raymond's major into being on top. To describe the Bukola situation, I guess a gambling metaphor would probably be the most appropriate. Organized crime is a lot like gambling in a casino. It's hard to know when you should cash in your chips and get out. A lot of people stick around longer than they should, and then they end up losing in the end. They go down, they lose their money, whatever it happens to be. Bukola, he was pretty smart. He saw the writing on the wall and he knew when to cash in his chips and get out of there. He started getting the sense that he was about to go down for tax evasion, like Al Capone before him, and he decided, okay, it's time to leave. Let's get out of the country. I'm going to go back to Sicily and be a chicken farmer. And he did. And you know who got left in charge when he was gone? Your boy Raymond. Absolutely. He was friends with Bukola. He was friends with the five families. He showed a ton of promise. He was the guy. So by the 1950s, Raymond's the Don. He consolidated power over most of coastal New England, and he became one of the most powerful crime bosses in the country in very short time. And then he moved the base of operations of the Boston organization to his childhood neighborhood of Federal Hill. And it would become infamous even more so because of his presence than probably anything. Raymond Patriarca ran in Providence for 3 decades of absolute dominance. His office at 168 Atwells Avenue was a revolving door of scumbags leaving him tribute. They would give him money, gifts, tomato sauce, whatever it takes to get on the boss's good side. And there was a general policy in Raymond's territory. If any job got done, if any dirty dollar was made in his territory, you bet Raymond's going to take a little bit of a piece of that. If you hold out on him, you might, well, let's continue. In 1969, Raymond Patriarca was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison in Georgia for conspiracy to commit murder on a mob bookie that was holding out on him. And then another 10 years in Rhode Island for more conspiracy to murder other guys, including the first guy's brother. But with Raymond, he just had this remarkable luck. He served his 5 years in Georgia, and then he was brought back to Rhode Island to serve the 10 years, and then was immediately released because they found that some of the guys involved in that trial had perjured themselves.
The jury returned to the fifth-floor courtroom at 2:42 this afternoon. They had been deliberating since Friday afternoon. Before the verdict, Judge Eugene Gallant cautioned the spectators, most friends of the defendants, against any sporadic outbursts. A contingent of Providence police was brought in to bolster the already heavy security guard. When the foreman announced the not guilty verdict, the gallery burst into brief applause despite the judge's warnings. The 63-year-old Patriarca drooped in his chair a bit and then briefly cried. He had been charged with being an accessory before the 1968 shotgun slayings of Rudolph Marfio and Anthony Maley in a Providence grocery store. An earlier trial resulted in a hung jury. The trial was highlighted by the testimony of a Catholic priest who first testified that he was with Patriarca when he was supposed to have been at a crucial meeting that connected the defendant with the crime. Later, the priest came back to tell the court he had his dates mixed up, and indeed he was not with the defendant on the date in question. The most crucial testimony, however, was that given by John Red Kelly, an underworld figure from Watertown, Massachusetts, who said he mapped the getaway route on the orders of Patriarca. Eventually, the case boiled down to whether or not the jury believed that testimony, and according to co-defense counsel Raymond Daniels, this is what won the case.
The turning point in the trial was Kelly's testimony. Having cross-examined him at length for some 3 days back in February and March at the trial of the 4 co-defendants, I was thoroughly prepared to bring out all the inconsistencies, and he completely changed his testimony, particularly as to the most important dates. A typical example was where he testified that one Louis Monacchio was at a meeting with him, a most important meeting, on April 2nd, 1968. As it turned out, we produced evidence 3 months ago that Mr. Monacchio was in the custody of the Providence Police Department that entire evening and could not have possibly been there. Accordingly, at this trial, Mr. Kelly again changed his testimony to conform with his new false version.
Well, now, Mr. Patriarca will be returned to federal prison. When possibly could he be freed now?
He could possibly be freed sometime in September of this year.
This coming September?
Yes.
What do you think the results of this trial will do to pending cases that Kelly will have to testify in, or is supposed to testify in?
I think Kelly's credibility has been severely damaged, if not totally destroyed. Obvious lies that I think he should be prosecuted for perjury. I was a prosecutor in Los Angeles for the district attorney's office for 11 years. And had I had anything to do with this case from the prosecution standpoint in this case, in this state, I would have dismissed this case a long time ago.
Just like that, Raymond was out 10 years early. So what does one do when they run a criminal operation, go away for 5 years, and now they're back? Well, the first thing you gotta do is check the company coffers. Of course. What else would you do? You gotta see how money's going right now. You must have collected a ton of tribute while you were in prison. Like, that's a lot of time. That's some passive income right there. So we checked the company coffers and they were looking pretty bare. Not quite meeting his expectations. Were they taking advantage of you, Raymond? And that's probably all he's thinking here. And it's like, okay, they disrespected him. It's time for a big display of real power. Some vengeance. Bam. Let's switch perspectives on some real Quentin Tarantino issue right there. And we're going to introduce you to our other main characters. No matter what I say here, Raymond Patriarca is actually the main character in this story. Everyone else, by comparison, is a minor character, even though we're not going to spend too much time with the boss himself. So it's time to introduce you to a couple guys a little bit lower on the criminal mastermind spectrum. First, we've got Robert Dussault, more affectionately known as the Deuce, or Deuce. And I'm probably just going to call him Deuce for most of this. The name comes from the word duce, which is like boss. It's what Benito Mussolini was called. He was duce. Robert Dussault has the term duce tattooed on his hand. I guess the best way to describe him is as a smooth talking burglar. He knows how to talk during a robbery. He knows how to kind of get in there quickly, smash and grab, not get people all panic. He keeps the people calm while they're being robbed. He gets out of there real quick, and most of the time it works. He's pretty good. He's a burglar. He loves to burgle things. He loves to burgle things as much as I love the mountain goats, which is a lot. The thing is, Deuce is only really a good burglar in his own time. He would not survive in the world of security cameras. He wasn't big into wearing a mask. He would just kind of run in, get it done real quick and get out. Because if you wore a mask, you would alert the person at like the desk or the bank clerk or whatever that you're about to rob them, and then they boom, hit the button. That's what would happen in that case. He would like to go in like any other person. He's just a normal customer guy, and then he just springs it on them. Hey, I'm robbing you. So that was his sort of style of burglary, and it was sort of the style of burglary at the time. If you're not in the bank when the police arrive, you can get away with a bank robbery. That may be oversimplified, but to a certain degree, there's some truth to that. Deuce's co-star is a guy named Charles Flynn, more affectionately known as Chucky. We're using their affectionate names today. Yippee. Chucky's a bad dude. He's a tough guy. He's a brick house. He's a killer. He's got a bad temper. There's this story about him that's probably not true, but the fact that anybody would tell this story about him just shows that he's sort of scary, of him getting upset with a girlfriend and then pushing her out of a moving vehicle and dragging her on the pavement while holding her ankle, like her face just dragging against the pavement while they drive, like until it's hamburger meat. That's scary. And even if it's a 1% chance that's true, you don't want to hang out with this guy. But Deuce loved hanging out with them. They loved each other. They were bros, they were broskies, potatoes. Deuce and Chucky were childhood friends. Their friendship carried on long into adulthood, and they lived lives of crime together. In a way, it's kind of beautiful. They were a couple cuties together, weren't they? Even though Deuce and Chucky were pretty good scumbags, like Raymond was also a pretty good scumbag. The law eventually catches up to people here and there. If you live these lives, you're going to spend a little bit of time in prison at least. Very few people live this life for an extended period of time and don't have actual criminal records. That would actually be a bit concerning if you were going to do a job with somebody who didn't have a criminal record. You would assume they don't know what they're doing. It's weird. In 1975, the two of them found themselves together in Massachusetts State Prison in Walpole, which was a little bit infamous. There were better prisons to be in, but they were doing it together. So they were, having a good old time. I don't know. They were not. They were not. It's prison. They were in prison together. So Deuce and Chucky were talking, and Chucky was alluding to a job that he had lined up for him in Rhode Island when he got out. Deuce didn't like Rhode Island. He didn't like the Italians. He was generally skeptical of all that stuff. He didn't want to get involved with the mafia. He just wanted to run his little small robbery operation thing and stay out of their way. He didn't want to get in trouble. He didn't want to be even, he didn't want them to know who he was. He was fine with what he was doing. Chucky, he was a little bit more involved with some higher ranking mafia figures. He was a little bit more on their radar. Whatever. We will talk about that stuff a little bit later. For now, Deuce and Chucky are about to meet somebody that is going to change their lives, for better or worse, forever. A guy named Gerard Ouimet was also serving time in Walpole with Deuce and Chucky. He was an interesting dude. He was one of Raymond's guys. In fact, Ouimet was one of Raymond's top guys. In a way, he wasn't a made man. To be a made man, you had to be Italian, which Ouimet already failed. He was fucking French, the worst crime that somebody could commit in this business that they're in. How dare you be born French? A true crime of birth. The Ouimet family would never be made men in a world dominated by the Italians. Although they wanted to be accepted in their culture, they also were very proud of their French heritage. And they couldn't have both, and they could never really be Italian, so they sort of leaned into the French stuff. Gerard Ouimet was known as the Frenchman, or more affectionately known as that Frenchman by some of Raymond's other guys. If you didn't realize by the colorful nature of that version of the nickname, they kind of resented him. Having a French guy being that close to Raymond, it's kind of like, that should be me. Like, I should be the guy close to Raymond. The reason Gerard, despite being French, is able to be close to Raymond is because he makes Raymond lots and lots and lots of money. He's good at what he does, so he sticks around. Raymond keeps him close. However, a lot of Raymond's guys want that position. So while Gerard is in prison, theoretically he should be safe because he would be under the protection of somebody like Raymond. However, Raymond's guys all want his position, so they're thinking like, oh, let's squeeze Gerard. Maybe he'll give up some of his drug connections and then we can usurp his position. And then boom, we have an Italian guy doing basically what he does. The people who are supposed to protect him are the people he is most afraid of in this case. So he turns elsewhere for help. He turns to two guys who are not affiliated with that stuff formally. He turns to Robert Dussault and Chucky Flynn. Deuce being sort of the mouth and Chucky being the muscles, they made a definitive statement that Gerard Wilmette was not to be messed with. Chucky was pushed into a boxing fight with a guy named Jimmy the Bear. His actual name was Vincent Flemmy, and he also had the nickname the Butcher. So, uh, cool guy. Definitely somebody you want to be in a boxing match with. But by all accounts, despite this guy being also a brick house, Chucky, by all accounts, destroyed him with ease. Just smacked down this fool. And when you look at these guys and you're like, oh, he just beat Jimmy the Bear and he's protecting Gerard Wilmette. Like, what are we gonna do? So people tend to sort of back off. That was the statement that had to be made. You don't mess with Gerard Wilmette, or you might get knocked out by Charles Flynn, his devastating right hook. So, like that, Deuce and Chucky impressed a friend that was worth having. Shortly after, Gerard was transferred to the Adult Correctional Institution in Cranston, Rhode Island, bringing him a bit closer to home. Shortly after Gerard's departure, a lawyer on Gerard's behalf visits Deuce in Walpole and gives him his business card. This is going to be important later. Shortly after that, Chucky ends up getting furloughed in Walpole and then just dips and goes to Rhode Island. He's on the run now. That's fun. That's how a lot of people end up getting out. They get furloughed and then they just leave. Deuce was then transferred to the Franklin House of Corrections in Greenfield, Massachusetts, where he was to finish a sentence that he skipped out on in the past. Yeah, it was really easy to do that, apparently. The prison was much cushier than Walpole. It was more of an apartment, at least that's how he and others have described it. However, just weeks before Deuce's actual scheduled release, somebody attempted to escape. And during that, Deuce dips. I don't even know. He was so close to a legitimate exit. He'd rather get out a little bit early and be on the run. I don't know. It kind of reminds me of those kids who are so close to finishing high school. Like at the end of senior year, they drop out even though they probably could pass. I don't know. You get so close to tasting that freedom that you just manifest it. You take it. I don't know. I guess I can sort of understand that. Prison is probably like, I've never been in prison. So if given the opportunity to escape, would I? Couldn't tell you. Deuce's newfound connections with the Italians made him nervous. He wasn't sure about it, but he sort of had to do something. He's on the run now. He needs some help. He takes out that old business card and he makes a call. He gets in touch with the lawyer who gives him the contact information for a John Wilmette, not Gerard, not to be mistaken. Gerard, he's still away. He's in prison. That is what it is. John is his brother, and he's running the business while Gerard is gone. John set up a meeting where Deuce would get picked up and brought somewhere safe. So John's cousin, Walter, sorry, these family connections, trying to keep them straight in my head. Walter, along with a couple big guys, come to get Deuce. Deuce is confronted by the big guys. It's scary. They try to get him to go in a car. Deuce insists on sitting in the back seat because if you've ever seen The Godfather, you know you don't sit in a vehicle with people behind you. That is just basic mob guy stuff, and The Godfather is out at this point, right? Yeah, The Godfather's definitely out at this point. When did The Godfather come out? Okay, I just checked, and The Godfather was firmly out at this point as a film. So that's a thing. That's cool. Despite the fact that this whole thing really reeked of a hit, Deuce ended up being fine. He was brought to an inconspicuous ranch house in East Providence where he would be reunited with his friend. Chucky hears a knock at the door. He gets a gun, as one does, and then when he opens the door, he sees his friend. He's holding a gun behind his back and he's like happy, but he's scared because, they're both on the run. This could be some kind of a setup. You got to be paranoid in this sort of life. Deuce ends up coming in, and only when Chucky is sure that they're safe, he puts the gun down on the table. They talk, they catch up on lost time, and then eventually Deuce brings up the idea of the Rhode Island job, the one that Chucky told Deuce about back in Walpole. And guess who's involved? John Wimette. I have no idea how familiar Chucky was with the Wimette family, like how acquainted he was, because it seems like he had an idea about this stuff beforehand, and then he ended up protecting Gerard Wimette. He probably knew what he was doing going into this, is what I'm saying. He seems to know more than Deuce does, despite the fact that Deuce has the appearance of being the brains. When Deuce asked about the job, Chucky met that with evasive language, even though he clearly knows more than he's letting on. I don't really know much, or John Wimette says it's a good score. And yes, it's a good score, but Chucky definitely knows a little bit more. Chucky's evasiveness did not instill a lot of confidence in the job, and this only got worse when Deuce met the crew, which was a big mishmash of guys. Some may have been impressive. We got some killers in the group. We've got Buddy Cianci, Mayor Buddy Cianci's environmental inspector, Jerry Tillinghast. He's part of it. That's kind of interesting. But Deuce in general is not impressed. No matter how good these guys are, he doesn't really know them from a hole in the ground. I mean, Chucky knows them, and he wants to trust Chucky. He clearly does, but I think he's questioning his judgment at this stage. Shortly after meeting the guys, John Wimette shows up to bring Deuce up to speed. He brings him to 101 Cranston Street in Providence. With John, Deuce, and Chucky in the car together, and Chucky nodding along like he's hearing this all for the first time, John Wimette excitedly explains what this score is going to be. He shows Deuce the red brick building that housed the Hudson Fur Storage Company. Fur coats were all the rage at this time. It's just, like, fur coats are kind of weird now, but, like, at the time, you'd get one for your mom, you'd get one for your broad, which is what they would probably call their significant other, but maybe not to her face, but around their friends. The Hudson Fur Company provided a bunch of fur-related services, cleaning, cold storage, that sort of thing. And once again, Deuce is not impressed. I don't give a rat's ass about furs, he says. Wimette told him the furs are not the target, dummy. Okay, he didn't say that, but, like, the furs are not the target, dummy. Also, furs cost a lot of money, so, like, I don't know if Deuce just had an objection to furs in general. Like, they could be pretty expensive. But the furs are not the target, dummy. The target is the contents of 150 safe deposit boxes lining the wall in the room where the furs are stored. This was Bonded Vault, a place where you could keep things that require a bit of discretion. The type of stuff that you wouldn't bring to a normal bank. It was a mob bank, and it was run by Raymond Patriarca himself. The ups and downs of robbing criminals are interesting. On one hand, they don't pursue legal action. What are they going to say? That guy stole the stuff I stole. No, they're not even going to claim they had losses. So, in a sense, it's a victimless crime. On the other hand, they don't pursue legal action. I know that's the same reason I gave for the other part, but, like, they gain retribution, they get justice in their own special way. So it's a pretty dangerous business. However, John Wimette described the score, and there's something very appealing about it. Mountains of jewels, dough, rare coins, bars of gold and silver. There is so much in this building just ready for the taking. And what turned everything around and made everything feel like, oh, this might actually be worth it, Raymond Patriarca himself had already okayed the job.
Screen, because we already had the okay from the man. And what I mean by that, you know who I mean when I say the old man, the number one, the uno, Raymond Patriarca, the boss in New England, Nobody does nothing big in this whole area without his okay and without him getting a piece of the action.
They're not robbing Raymond Patriarca under normal circumstances. They are robbing his mob bank with his permission. Deuce was taken aback. Why would Raymond okay a job in which his own guys are the victims? Well, there's an easy answer for that. Vengeance. They didn't pay tribute when he was in prison, so now he's going to take his tribute. This is Raymond's massive action of retribution for everyone who he believes did him wrong while he was gone. And Deuce and Chucky are merely two of the many instruments that are going to enact that vengeance. If they get rich in the process, that's fine. What this is about to Raymond is proving a point. Deuce was still a little bit nervous, but in a way he sort of came around. It's kind of the perfect heist. What could possibly go wrong? So before Bonded Vault, we have a couple other jobs that members of the Bonded Vault crew are going to be doing in the meantime. There's a lot of preparation that goes into a big job, so they're going to do a couple small jobs on the way and prepare some of the green people on the crew who may not necessarily be ready for the big job, may not necessarily be proven. We're going to be robbing a coin shop. They gotten word that this coin shop had gotten a shipment of some new valuable gold coins that they wanted to get their hands on. So Deuce, as the appointed gunman for the Bonded Vault job, was in charge of putting this together. He decided to take some of the less experienced people who were gonna be on the Bonded Vault job and, get their toes dipped in the water of criminal life. Some of them do have some experience, but some of them don't even have criminal records. He's a little skeptical, and he wants to make sure they know what they're doing when the real job comes around. He brought along Jacob Tarzian, Robert McCaskill, and Lawrence Laneau. Here's how it went. Deuce and McCaskill enter the building first and quickly tie up two employees and buzz the other two in. That's when it gets weird. Tarzian and Laneau enter, and Laneau immediately starts freaking out. He seems to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. I don't know. Maybe he's paranoid because one of the guys is looking at him. He starts beating on one of these tied up employees, stop looking at me. And McCaskill and Deuce have to pull him off and point him in the direction of the vault and be like, hey, idiot. This is what we're here to do. Go do the thing. You got to open the vault, dummy. I don't know. Maybe he was just nervous and decided, hey, I'm going to get rid of my nerves by asserting power over these already tied up people. Who knows? I've never robbed a bank before, or a coin shop in this case. Everyone except Deuce goes to the back, opens the vault, and starts loading a bunch of duffel bags with coins. And Deuce tries to keep the people in the front calm. That's actually a really good skill that Deuce has. He doesn't necessarily, he goes for intimidation, but he kind of knows when it's right to play good cop. Hey, you're going to be okay. Don't worry. We're just going to get the stuff and we're going to get out. And you're going to get a lot more cooperation from that sort of approach sometimes. In that way, he's very different from the hot-headed Lawrence Laneau. The other guys come out with their duffel bags loaded, they're ready to make their escape, and they start leaving, and my God, McCaskill and Laneau just start arguing, just yelling at each other as they're walking away. Who knows how much attention they're drawing to themselves, and it's like, hey, I want to be shotgun. I want to sit in the front seat. No, I want to sit in the front seat. Not even joking. That's apparently something that they were arguing over. So Deuce is kind of pissed. I would be. But they get in the car, they start leaving, and he starts to sink into his seat, feel a little bit more calm, a little bit of serenity washes over him at the idea we get to go back and do the best part of any robbery. We get to count the loot. They return, and Chucky takes a look at the stuff. This next part is not a very good sign. Chucky asks, whose job was it to load the bags? And Deuce immediately points the finger at Laneau, and it was his job. Where are the gold coins? Clearly, Lanu messed up. Something went wrong along the way. They didn't get the coins they needed. And Lanu is all embarrassed. He ends up getting a coin catalog and really staring at all these collector's items that he ended up snagging, see if he can get some sort of value from them. But to them, to the larger crew in general, for what they were aiming for, these things were worthless. Despite that, it's now time to prepare for the big one. Although they are demonstrably dysfunctional, they're going to have to make this work. Deuce ends up making some calls. He goes to Lawrence Lanu and he offers him a special position in the Bonded Vault Heist. Lanu definitely messed up this coin shop job. That is clear. He lost his temper when it was really not necessary. He got the wrong stuff. He is not very good at the in the moment stuff. So, what is Deuce going to do with this guy? He offers him the most important job: getaway driver. This is actually genius in a way. He found the weakest link when it came to actual robbery, and he gave him something that he could practice over and over again. And that's what they did. Deuce and Lanu, they got in the car and they did the getaway route as many times as it took until he knew it backwards and forwards. Like that, he neutralized what could have been a major problem in the job. Deuce has some leadership skills. That's what you do. You find people's strengths or you find people's weaknesses. You downplay the weaknesses, you accentuate the strengths. That's how you build a team. That's team building right there. There's some lessons to be learned from these criminals. There were some other issues leading up to the actual heist. Nothing huge, but some stuff that sort of delayed the process. The truck was an issue. Some of the crew was seen by a police officer with the getaway truck, and they were concerned that maybe later on he could identify them or the truck or identify them together, and that would have been a huge issue. So they played it safe. They got a new truck. That's cool. Actually, I think it was a van this time. They went from a truck to a van. There was another issue on the day that the heist was supposed to initially go down, where Raymond's son, Raymond Patriarca Jr., apparently had to get some more stuff out of Bonded Vault. I find it weird that he didn't already have his stuff out because he was definitely in on this as some sort of a representative of his father. Raymond Patriarch, I don't know if he forgot or if he just wanted to do it at the last possible second so as not to alert anybody. I'm not sure why Raymond Patriarca Jr. would not have had everything he needed out of Bonded Vault on the day of, but it was apparently delayed a day for that reason, or at least that's the dominant theory. With that little bit of ambiguity out of the way, let's talk about the actual heist. Just note, like I've said, this is thrown together from some contradictory accounts of the event. I did my best to throw together the version of the story that I felt sounded most plausible, but there might be some little itty bitty details that may differ from actual events. When it comes to all this mob stuff, a lot of the accounts we get are from people who chose to talk, who have their own sort of narratives they're trying to push. It's complicated, so I can't say this is a perfect recreation of the heist, but let's do our best. Thursday, August 14th, 1975. Most of Hudson Fur's staff is on vacation. Officially, the business was closed for the day. This is one of the confusing bits. I don't know if Bonded Vault operated on Hudson Fur hours. So this first part here has a little bit of ambiguity. I'm just going to do a tell you both sides sort of thing just to make it clear, because I think this is an important little detail, though I can't tell you for sure which version is true. There were 5 people in the building on the day of the heist. The 3 Levine brothers, Sam, Hyman, and Abraham, as well as Hyman's wife, Rosalind. Their secretary, Barbara Oliva, was also in the building at the time. Sam handled the front desk while the others were a bit deeper into the building. So when Deuce approached, he was the one that he encountered first. Here's where a little bit of ambiguity comes in. Apparently, Deuce had to be buzzed in. That seems to be the understanding here. Sam must have hit the buzzer and allowed Deuce to walk into the building. Deuce was unmasked, which I think is an important detail here. He doesn't look like he's trying to rob the place, so I don't know if it happened just sort of passively and he just hit the button like, oh, somebody's coming up, let's let him in. But Hudson Fur was closed, although I don't know for sure if Bonded Vault would also be considered closed at this time. He might have let him in like, oh, this is Bonded Vault business here. This guy looks like a Bonded Vault guy. Another theory, which may be a little bit conspiratorial, but is not entirely out of the realm of possibility, Sam was in on it. When Deuce walked up to the door, he would have been pretty confident that he was going to get buzzed in by some means or another. So I assume either Sam was in on it, he knew he was going to buzz in Deuce on this day, which is certainly possible. You got to remember, Bonded Vault was Raymond's project. Technically, the Levine brothers work for Raymond. I don't think it's crazy that Sam could have been in on the job and assisted in a passive sort of way in allowing this heist to go down. All I know for sure is if Deuce was not buzzed in, the heist might have been over right then and there. So I feel Deuce must have been pretty confident when he walked up that he was going to be able to get in. Whatever you take out of it beyond that, I don't know, your guess is as good as mine. Deuce pulls a gun out of his suitcase and holds it to Sam, and has him call out the others, one by one. The other Levine brothers, Rosalind and Barbara Oliva, all made their way up. There was a little bit of tension between Deuce and Oliva. Oliva didn't seem to understand that she was also required at the front of the store, so she delayed, making Deuce a little bit angry. He holds his gun to her.
And he says, tell her not to look at me. I'm going to blow off her f***ing head.
And she asks a question that still baffles me to this day.
I'm looking at this gun because he had it like on my shoulder and it's pointing at me like this. And I looked over and I said, are those real bullets in that gun?
It's kind of a funny question. I like to think that was her way of calling him a P word. But like a lot of things with this, your guess is as good as mine. But that's what I like to imagine. That's my headcanon. Are those real bullets in that gun? Like she was mocking him. Honestly, I don't know. What do you do when there's a gun to your head? You might say some silly things. It could have just been that. Deuce pulls pillowcases out of his suitcase and puts them over everybody's heads, except Sam. They need Sam to guide them into the vault. The other robbers were concerning in their behavior. They were all supposed to enter in groups of 2 separately, so as not to draw too much attention. If they all entered at once, it could draw a little bit more attention. So Chucky's group comes in, but then the others sort of drag their feet. Apparently there's some sort of a conflict in the van, and Lanou has to kick these guys out of the van and force them to come in. I don't know if they were getting cold feet or something, but it was enough to make Deuce and Chucky pretty nervous at the early stages of this heist. The other men entered wearing coveralls and masks. Their identities were pretty much perfectly concealed, except Chucky, who was struggling with his mask. The only person who was completely exposed was Deuce, wearing a suit and no mask. Deuce expected that he was going to be out of the state in no time anyway. He also couldn't approach the door and get buzzed in wearing a mask like some kind of common criminal, so he had to play that role that he plays in a lot of his heists. No masks, just be an ordinary guy, get in, do the job, get out, leave, go far away. Sam showed the robbers down to the 7-ton steel vault door, and its contents were astounding. These safe deposit boxes were bigger than you would see at a normal bank. They were having trouble getting into them, but eventually they break out a crowbar, they pry them out of the wall, and the contents spill on the floor. And my God, So many gold bars, coins, cash, everything. Who knows if they're even going to be able to take it all? It's probably impossible. They only have like 7 or so duffel bags. They can't fit all this stuff.
You just would not believe it was knee-deep. Money, silver bars, gold bars, raw gems, guns.
And that's what was left behind.
That's what was left behind.
So can you imagine what was taken?
Oh, unbelievable what was taken.
This is way more than they ever would have expected. Well, let's take what we can. Leave the small bills, take the big stuff. Chaos ensues. There's just yelling and cursing or whatever. And this takes over an hour for them to do this full thing. Meanwhile, Deuce is up with everybody else, and right outside the door, smoking a cigarette, was Max Gellerman. This was a bit of a scare here. This is Sam's uncle. Deuce quietly opens the door, threatens him, brings him inside, and sits him next to the other hostages. Sam and Gellerman do not acknowledge each other. The other guys made their way out of the vault with their duffel bags stuffed with booty. The contents of the safe deposit boxes were spread out on the floor of the vault. They couldn't take it all. They say it went up to their knees. People looked at it in the future and were like, if this is what they left behind, imagine what they took. And we don't have an exact number of how much they took. We got guesses, but one could only imagine at this point how correct they are. While the others made their way out, Deuce forced all the employees into a small bathroom where he jammed a chair underneath the door. They all began to panic because they would slowly start to run out of air. They survived, but it was a very unpleasant experience. The robbers all got in the van, which sagged under the weight of the massive haul as Lanou drove them each to separate getaway vehicles that were scattered around the area. And then they all made their way back to the hideout, one by one, starting with Chucky. The rest of the crew quickly followed Chucky into the hideout, where they proceeded to count the loot. And you know what you do when you have more money than you know what to do with? You stuff your pockets. A coin or two might have went missing. In the end, each guy walked away with $64,000 that day. And remember, this is 1975. Let me put a conversion on the screen just so you have an idea how much that is for like an hour and a half worth of work. They took their $64,000 from the cash, but a lot of this stuff had to be fenced. We don't know 100% what happened after this with all the money, but presumably it went to New York, where John Gotti's crew may have had something to do with it. Yeah, I mean, Raymond's got connections. Of course he's involved with Teflon Don himself. Little did Deuce know that 64 grand was all he was supposed to see. He was kind of under the impression that he was going to get another payday after the stuff was fenced. Some people kind of understood this is their payday. Deuce thought the work is done, but there are more paydays to come. I don't think Deuce really understood how small he was in this operation. Yeah, he did the footwork, but let's not forget who really matters here, who this is really about. The police arrived later at Hudson Fur to find themselves knee-deep in treasure. All of this stuff is mixed together. We don't know what belongs to who. People used fake names for their accounts. Some people's money got mixed with other people's money. Like, what do you do? And people don't want to come forward about what has been stolen because it was initially probably stolen. You don't have anybody who can come in and be like, hey, I lost this amount of money in that robbery. I'm making a claim. What can you do if no victim is willing to come forward? The police are a little bit confuzzled at this whole thing. Just one big unaccountable mess for the city of Providence. First thing in the morning, Deuce and Chucky, along with Chucky's girlfriend, set off for New York, where they ended up catching a flight for, you guessed it, Las Vegas. Sin City, here we come. We're getting out of Rhode Island. This was Deuce's plan from the beginning. He didn't want to be in Rhode Island anyway. Of course we're going to go to Vegas. Since money isn't an issue, they go to the MGM Grand, which Deuce heard was the best hotel they could go to in Vegas. Chucky saw this as the job to end all jobs. something that could help him sort of get out of the game. He could get married, have a family, and just kind of move on with his life. He ended up proposing. It was a beautiful thing, and Deuce ended up helping. He got him some wine. He got them to like spread out rose petals on the bed or whatever, and make a real meal out of the whole proposal thing. I mean, they have money; they can be extravagant with it. It's some cute bro right there, helping your bro do a broposal. Yeah, there we go. We're back. So, of course, at this point, Deuce wants some female companionship of his own. He sees Chucky all happy with his new fiancée. What's he gonna do? Start wooing some girls? He has a lot of money. Why not just buy one from the catalog? So he does. One comes up to his room. They have a good old time. Then he doesn't remember that he asked somebody early on, like, how do I get some female companionship? So another girl comes up to his room. Now he's got two girls, and he asks the other one to come back later, which, is, yeah. This is all a weird situation. In the end, he ends up hanging out with the second girl. Her name was Karen. Karen was a young sex worker that found herself at Deuce's door. She was described as not yet being so jaded by the nature of her profession. She was young, attractive, and as enthusiastic about sex as you'd want a young sex worker to be. Very quickly, she and Deuce started to hit it off, and it transitioned from being a transactional relationship to an actual relationship. Back in Providence, Mayor Vincent Cianci is pissed. His run as mayor would become pretty infamous, but this is still early on. They just want to do something to trace these losses before they end up getting fenced, but nobody is coming forward, so it's a big, frustrating embarrassment for him. So what they do is that they look for rats. That's what you do when you're trying to catch a mobster. The best person to catch a mobster is another mobster. That's why witness protection exists. You got to be able to incentivize people to talk. Otherwise, you're not going to get any good information. They ended up getting some witnesses to get a sketch of Deuce. It was pretty obvious that he was going to be the one identified, if any. He didn't wear a mask. He kind of knew that something like this was coming. He wasn't happy about it once he ended up learning about it, but it's not necessarily all that surprising. Back in Vegas, Deuce and Chucky are spending like crazy, kind of as if they think there's going to be more money in the future, like the money they have is just for funsies and they're going to get their real payday down the line. They're not. It's not going to happen. However, cute little story here. Deuce ends up buying Chucky a Lincoln. He bought him a freaking car. That's so cute. I mean, like, if I had that kind of money, I'd love to buy a car for my friend. Just to see his face light up. But these two, they're bros. I'm just saying, like, that's love. That's true love, man. It's for real. However, things end up going poorly. Chucky, I haven't mentioned this yet, at least I don't think. He has a gambling problem. He's not very good with his money. Like, Deuce is bad with his money, but he can win sometimes. Chucky does not win. Chucky is bad at gambling. He starts losing a lot of money. His fiance ends up getting really concerned, and Deuce has to like talk him off the ledge. Like, dude, you're not coming back from this. You're a loser today, but you can save yourself if you just walk away, cut your losses, go home. And, it's his bro telling him it. So Chucky ends up realizing, wow, if Deuce is saying it, and I love Deuce, I love him like a brother from another mother, I should probably step away before this ruins everything. Because I value our friendship so much, his opinion means so much to me. And that's what happened. He ends up getting out of Vegas. He ends up going, and it just leaves Deuce and Karen. Deuce and Karen end up going to San Fran and LA and Disney. They end up doing a bunch of touristy stuff. They're a young, new, excited couple where everything is still fun. So, they're having a good old time. Around this time, Deuce ends up hearing the news that they've identified him and they're looking for him in Rhode Island. Of course, while Deuce is on the run, he's using a fake name. That's obvious. He's trying to be inconspicuous, damn it. except for all the crazy spending he's doing. At this time, Deuce's mood goes a bit dark. He starts drinking more, and he and Karen start fighting. This is when the cycle of abuse between him and her begins. There was an early incident where Deuce and Karen were arguing, where Deuce grabbed her by the neck and threw her across the bed, shouting obscenities at her. It was getting pretty bad, and at that point, Deuce decided, I don't know, I guess I'm just gonna come clean. I'm gonna tell her where I'm at right now, because I feel like she doesn't understand where I'm coming from, so I got to tell her where I'm at. He tells her he's wanted for some serious stuff back east. He doesn't tell her his real name, and she ends up just being sort of cool. She's like, "Oh, I got you back," on some Bonnie and Clyde type ish. And then, now she's in on it. She knows he's a criminal and he can sort of, in a way, be more himself with her. She's got a real ride or die mentality. Like, he tried to leave her and she ends up accepting him and pulling him back into their relationship. Deuce calls Chucky, assuming he's supposed to get more money soon. Of course, the goods have not been fenced yet. Things are still hot. Deuce is asking for another $100K, which no fucking way. No fucking way is he getting another $100,000. But Chucky's like, okay, we'll see what we can do. The guys end up actually taking up a collection for Deuce to give him a little bit more money, given the sensitive nature of the situation. Maybe if they give him a little bit more money, he'll be cool and there won't be a problem going forward. But Chucky doesn't end up really telling Deuce straight up, from the sound of it, that he's not getting any more money. I think at this point, Chucky understands the situation. Deuce is the last person to catch on. They end up getting Deuce another $8,000 to sort of get him by for a little bit, which still good money. $8,000, Deuce can do some stuff with $8,000 for a little while in 1975. That could definitely help him lay low. However, Chucky's getting a little bit nervous about him. The thing is, they're looking for him. He keeps talking about money. He was a little bit sketchy. He was never really into the heist to begin with. Deuce is starting to make him and everybody nervous, and he's the first one who was identified. There's a lot that could go wrong here. What if they catch him? What if he talks? Deuce and Karen start moving around the country with no real sense to it, and the cycle of abuse just gets worse. Amphetamines end up getting added to it. They end up taking these things called black beauties. I couldn't explain them super well. I'm not well versed in drugs, but that's what they're taking right now. So add that to the cycle of abuse. They argue, he hits her, they make up, rinse, repeat. This is a toxic relationship if I've ever seen one. And as things go, Deuce keeps going back to Chucky. More money, more money, more money, more money, more money, 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 money. And then Chucky ends up getting fed up and it's like, dude, you're just gonna have to wait. Stop pestering me. While all of this is going on, a small-time lawyer from Attleboro, Massachusetts named Robert Kelly comes out claiming that he's representing an intermediary for Robert Dussault, claiming that Robert Dussault wants to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for immunity and $100,000, the same amount that he asked for from the Bonded Vault earnings. What a coinky-dink. So thoughts start swirling around. This report could be bullshit. That's totally possible. This lawyer could be a plant just putting stuff out in the air, waiting for people to start turning on each other and talking. You make them think Robert Dussault's going to talk, maybe somebody else will talk. It's good strategy. Naturally, Chucky was already nervous about this thing. And while Karen and Deuce were staying in Dallas, that's just where they happen to be on this random journey, they get a call from Chucky saying he's coming to see them. Deuce sees the writing on the wall at this point. It's pretty clear that Chucky is absolutely 100%, no doubt, coming to kill him. He's got to figure something out. He tells Karen what's going on, and obviously, she's ride or die. Karen even offers to kill Chucky for Deuce. She takes a pair of scissors and takes it apart so it's two separate knife things. And she offers to go up to Chucky and just stab him in the jugular. He wouldn't even see it coming from her. That's a different kind of ride or die. Somebody who's willing to not only die for you, but kill for you. That's something. It doesn't take away from how incredibly toxic their relationship is. If anything, it just makes it worse. So let's not romanticize this. But I don't know. There's something there. It's deeply problematic, but it's something. Deuce and Karen head back to Vegas, to Karen's apartment. They look around and they see signs of entry. Things are missing. Things have been moved. Someone's been here. Chucky must have got there before they did. After they look around for a bit, Deuce starts to hear a noise. Clicking. Kind of like footsteps coming down the hall. Then, knock, knock. Who's there? Deuce looks through the peephole and he sees the last person he wants to see. It's Chucky. He's not looking good. He looks tired. He's unshaven and he has his hand in his pocket. Chucky calls out to them, "Hey, let me in. I know you're there. I see your car out there. I just want to talk." He waits, but they say nothing. I mean, it's pretty clear that they're caught. He knows where they are. They're not letting him in, though. So he says, "I'll be back." At this point, they're just sitting ducks, waiting for something to happen. Chucky saunters off, and now it's time for Deuce and Karen to make some kind of plan. Karen, she's pretty gangsta. She knows what she's doing. I mean, I'm not going to downplay Karen's role in all of this. Deuce, he's hardcore. He did one of the biggest heists in American history. It's up there. It's not at the top, but it's pretty good. It's well beyond his normal station. But Karen, she knows how to respond to this. She makes a phone call. Apparently, she knows a guy. Deuce ends up picking up the phone and talking to the guy that she has on there. He's like, "Hey, I have some people who are after me. I have a problem here and I need an equalizer of some kind." The guy on the phone knows exactly what Deuce is talking about and ensures him that he's going to have a little bit of help. Shortly after, someone comes to the door. It's not Chucky. It's somebody else. Deuce opens the door a crack and sees a little hand stick through with a paper bag. Deuce takes it and closes the door. The other person leaves. Deuce removes the bag that was carrying a double-barrel, sawed-off shotgun with 5 shells. I'm just saying, Chucky typically carried a run-of-the-mill pistol. This is nothing super hardcore. What Deuce just got is not an equalizer. This is an advantage. A pistol is fine. It's dangerous. You can do a lot of bad things with a pistol. With a double-barrel shotgun, you could blow somebody away. Now, Deuce is the one who is dangerous. However, Chucky has Deuce at sort of a disadvantage. Deuce doesn't know where Chucky is. Chucky knows where Deuce is. And, worse, there's no food in the apartment. Karen and Deuce have to eat. They could get starved out, basically, by Chucky and friends, whoever he happens to have with him. So, Karen makes the decision to go out and go shopping. I mean, it's what she has to do at this point. People need food. How long can they really wait out? Oh, maybe they won't follow her. Maybe they're just interested in Deuce. Maybe she can get away with this. While she's driving, Karen looks in the rearview mirror. She notices a truck behind her. She sees somebody she recognizes. It's Chucky. And he has 3 other men with him. He's joined by both Ralph Skippy Burns and Joe Denise from the Bonded Vault Heist. This is a point where it might be worth pointing out there are some contradictions between the different stories here. Gerard Womet's version of the story actually places Jerry Tillinghast at the scene, though no other version of the story actually places Jerry Tillinghast here. It actually does not seem that he was there. Gerard Womet was in prison, so maybe he was not as in the loop as he thought he was when it came to like the groundwork. Like he was a big picture guy when this all comes down to it. Let's not pretend that he didn't have a huge role in pretty much everything going on, but it's very possible he made the mistake when writing it later on and included Jerry Tillinghast in this group of people. But as far as this version of the story goes, I believe that it was just 3 men in that truck that day. Karen knew this was not good. She began to panic. She didn't know what to do. She pulled up beside the nearest police officer and told him what was going on. Not too much, just that she was being followed. The officer then pulls over the truck with the 3 men in it and makes them get out of the car. He pats them down and doesn't find any weapons on them, though there are probably weapons in the vehicle. Karen gets kind of smart here. This is a really interesting choice. She knows for a fact right now that Chucky does not have a gun on his person. Who knows what's in the truck, but not on his person. She speaks to the officer and says, "It's a bit of a misunderstanding. We can patch this up. How about he comes with me to speak to my friend? We have this issue. He just wants to see our mutual friend. So he can come with me and we can patch things up and we can all go home." This convinces the officer to let the men go, and then Chucky goes in Karen's car to go see Deuce. The other guys do not follow. Karen arrives back at the apartment, and this is really interesting. She goes up to see Deuce and tells him what's going on. "Hey, I just brought Chucky here. Yeah, that happened." So, of course, she gets hit for that because you just brought Chucky here. What are you doing? Are you insane? But then she explains more. He doesn't have a gun. You're ready. You can go there and get the jump on him right now. So, Deuce realizes this is the best chance he's ever going to get. He gets out of the apartment, goes down to the vehicle, gets in right next to Chucky, and points the sawed-off shotgun right at him, ready to blow him away. This is a rather delicate moment. Neither of these guys really want to kill each other. They still love each other. I'm not saying that Chucky wouldn't have done it if he had the advantage in this situation, but it's kind of hard to say. They talk. They explain themselves. Chucky explains the stuff about the lawyer. Deuce says it's bullshit. Deuce says that he was scared legitimately that Chucky was going to kill him. And by all accounts, they began to talk and understand each other a little bit better and decided, this is crazy. These two decide because their love is true, they don't want to kill each other. Let's walk away. Let's choose trust today. Let's go get something to eat with the girls and catch up. And they did. They went from one about to kill the other, and then the tables got turned, and now they're going out to eat, and apparently everything's fine? This is insane. You understand why this story is so weird to me, right? As Chucky and Deuce start getting along again, there is one more bad sign that kind of pops up, the ever-present, hey, once we get some money, we can move on and whatever. Once we get the money that we're owed from the heist, and at this point, Chucky knows they're not getting money from the heist, but Deuce keeps talking about it like it's going to happen. It's like an omen looming over their heads. As long as Deuce is thinking about this money, something feels a little bit wrong between them. However, Chucky ends up talking to Denise and Burns and decides, hey, he's not going to rat. I trust him, and that's all that matters here. The 2 men were at least incredulous about the whole thing, but Denise especially was pissed. I'm not going to jail over this fucking motherfucker, is what he said. So, in the end, the team is as dysfunctional as they've ever been. Eventually, somebody's going to try to break it, and it ends up being Karen. On their way to Florida, because they're still traveling around kind of aimlessly, they have a big blow up. There were some issues with the car that kind of fueled the argument, and it just got worse and worse, and eventually, Karen decides it's done. Karen realizes things are not getting better, and she decides to leave. She calls the police. Not to arrest Deuce, she just wanted to go get her stuff. She needed somebody else in the room. So they were. They were actually pretty buddy-buddy with Deuce while she was taking her stuff out, so, you know, that is what it is. Deuce might have actually been all right if he just let go, but he couldn't. Having her leave on her terms, something about that, he just couldn't let that lie. So he decided to go back to Vegas, traveling all the way across the country again to beat her to her apartment. He arrives in Vegas before she does and just waits for her. After a while, he realizes, oh, she's not coming. Where could she be? He starts calling people, family members, trying to pin down exactly where she is, and word gets around to her he's in her freaking apartment. And she's starting to get a little bit annoyed at that because she tried to leave him and he's just gonna wait in her apartment? No, she's calling the police again, and this time it's for real. They arrived, they arrested Deuce, and they found him with 2 conflicting IDs, which is a bit of a red flag, and a copy of the story about his indictment. Now we set the scene. Deuce is in a little room being talked to by police, FBI agents. Deuce demands a phone call that he was waiting for quite some time. Yeah, they'll give him a phone call, but they're going to make you wait for it. They identify him pretty quickly. They check out his hand, D-U-C-E. It's a pretty distinct tattoo. Doesn't do him any favors. Ah, Bobby Dussault. Is that your name? One of them says. He definitely knows he's screwed at this point. He just wants to wait for that lawyer. How could it get worse? Well, the next statement definitely is the only way it could have gotten worse. Do you know Chucky Flint? Deuce's ears must have perked up at the mention of the man that let him live. Well, the word is, he's dead. The mob shot him a few days ago. Deuce just sat there with the news. He's been talking to police, FBI, trying to refuse to speak, but this new news is just too heavy for him. This was enough to make him crack. They just kept working that angle. You know, Chucky Flynn, he's dead because of you. Joe Denise did it. Every second that passes, he's getting tired. He's been doing amphetamines and running across the country for so long. He's been living at 100 miles an hour, and now he's been just knocked on his ass. And at this point, he only knows one thing that he can do. Yes, I'm Bobby Dussault. They killed Chucky, so he's going to have them all put in jail. He makes a full confession, names everybody, including Patriarcha, Senior and Junior, the Womettes, everybody. Shortly after this, all the members of the Bonded Vault crew were immediately arrested, including Chucky Flynn. From there, after they got the confession they needed, they let Deuce know, Chucky's not dead, you doofus. We lied to you, like liars do. Turns out the authorities don't necessarily have to tell you the truth to get a confession out of you. Deuce was duped. Chucky wasn't dead. They lied. They completely manufactured that when he was at his most vulnerable. They got a confession out of him, and now there's no turning back. He just sold out everybody, including the guy who let him live. As far as the mob's concerned, Deuce is a rat. It doesn't matter how he got to that conclusion, he ratted them out. He named names. That's something you never do. He has to die. That's why they thought he was supposed to die before. That's why Chucky was supposed to kill him. And then he ended up ratting anyway. And you know what's fun about this? He wasn't the only one. Somebody else also turned state's evidence and talked. Remember Joe Denise? Remember what he said when Chucky said, "We're not killing Deuce? I'm not going to jail over this motherfucker." From that point, Joe Denise knew what he was going to do. He's not going down for this. He's going to talk. He would have done it right. Chucky blew that, and now Deuce is coming out to stab them all in the back. He's not going down for that. He's going to talk too. And in the end, that's how you take down a mob guy. You get other mob guys to talk. The witness protection program was adopted so that you could incentivize people to talk. That's what Deuce ended up getting. He went into witness protection.
Dussault disappeared into the witness protection program.
What you guys all want?
It took more than 2 years, but Target 12 has obtained Dussault's massive 362-page FBI file. Much of the information was removed by the federal government, but we were able to piece together what happened to the Deuce, and this may be the greatest twist of all.
The file reveals Dussault changed his name to Robert Dempsey, and unbelievably, we now know he robbed banks and businesses while in the witness protection program. Dussault was eventually nabbed and served a few years in prison. Then the file goes cold.
In the end, he took some people down. Not everybody went down. The trial was rather interesting. I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not going to go through all the stuff here. I think there's a better person to explain the Bonded Vault trial. However, it really came down to whether or not you could break a person's alibi. Most of the members of the Bonded Vault crew did not go down for the Bonded Vault heist. A lot of them went to prison later on for other stuff. However, in this trial, only 3 people went down. Ralph Skippy Burns' alibi was broken, and John Wimette was caught manufacturing his own alibi, so they ended up going down. And Chucky Flynn went down. Thanks to Deuce's testimony, as well as the testimony of Barbara Oliva. Remember her? She was the secretary at Hudson Fur. During the heist, Chucky was struggling with his mask, keeping it on right. And he kept fiddling with it. She ended up catching a glimpse of him and was able to identify him during the trial, which did not help. So good on you, Barbara. You were paying attention. You knew the assignment. Everybody else, however, walked free, at least on that day. Jerry Tillinghast, he was the greatest during this whole thing, but also the worst. I don't want to say that any of this is good. It's just humorous in a way, like, it's so weird. Jerry Tillinghast ended up fighting with a bunch of people. He told one guy he was going to dig up his dead father and throw him on his fucking lawn, which I think just like as a thing to say somebody you're mad at is pretty humorous while terrible. There was also another guy who jokingly offered to give him an oral favor if you were found not guilty. You know, he had no intention of actually doing it, but Jerry told him he'd meet him on the steps and that he could cash that in. I don't think Jerry ended up getting that much, though. There was a moment on stand where Deuce was talking to Chucky, and he apologized. He said he would never have done it if he didn't believe that Chucky were dead. Deuce just sobbed in the presence of his ex-friend, who apparently went to his death never having forgiven him. In a way, you take these people who are not sympathetic by any means and you see a little bit of humanity in them, and you start to feel bad until you realize it was all... Remember that lawyer, the Attleboro lawyer? The one that was trying to negotiate on Deuce's behalf, trying to get that $100,000, trying to get that protection from the government? Well, that was true. Deuce had the intention of selling people out earlier. Before Chucky came after him, Deuce was already hedging his bets. Deuce was a liar. He lied about everything. And I don't know if he ever cared about Chucky the same way Chucky cared about him. In the end, Chucky's a bad dude, but he let him live. Deuce sold out Chucky when he thought he was dead, but there is evidence that he would have sold him out when he was alive. So, figure that. You know who didn't go down for all this? Raymond Patriarca. Raymond and Raymond Jr. weren't even supposed to be mentioned in the trial. It was felt that, just by their infamy, if they were mentioned in the trial, it could prejudice the jury against anybody involved. So they were referred to as John Doe Sr. and John Doe Jr. Although I'm pretty sure everybody had a good idea who they were talking about. Raymond's fame, or infamy, preceded him. In the end, nobody really knows what happened to all that loot. Not the $64,000 everybody took, but The rest of it, the loot that ended up getting fenced, did it ever come back? Whose hands was it in? Well, given how all of this went, and I remind you, there is only one main character in this story. It's not Chucky. It's not Deuce. There's only one guy who matters here, and it's pretty clear that he was the one who won in all of this. Just a petty vendetta against the people that did not pay him proper tribute. All these people were just pawns in that much greater story. So that's it, everybody. That was fun. It's been a while since I've been on camera, so I was a little bit nervous here. I like being able to share with you stories about the place that I come from. I have such a love for Rhode Island, such a love for Providence, such a love for my local history that it's just a pleasure to share it. And you may wonder, this doesn't seem like a great place to be. When I tell you these stories, you may not think so, but I do think it's a genuinely lovely place with a fascinating history, and I'm doing this for a very specific reason. My philosophy on studying history has changed. It's become a bit self-centered, I do admit, but my goal, I think, has become a lot more clear. It's not just history for the sake of history. I'm not trying to teach anything specific. It's very much for myself. What I want to do is take the world around me and turn it into something significant through my eyes. I love museums. I love walking around and seeing all of these bits of history. When you learn your local history, it's like turning the everyday world around you into a museum. There's significance everywhere, and there's something beautiful about that. And that's my goal. I want to turn my world into a museum. That's why I want to study the world around me. Warts and all, I have a love for Rhode Island that I look forward to sharing with you in the future. I've got some fun stories coming up, and I hope you end up enjoying this stuff. So, yeah, thank you, and I'll see you next time.